Good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our record keeping and reporting of occupational injuries and illnesses this morning. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. One thing's working on this Tuesday morning. Good. All right, we're going to get started in about a minute. We ask that everybody mute your phone unless you have a question, so that way we don't have feedback, pretty please. And we will start in about a minute. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you again for tuning in to our record keeping and reporting webinar this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started on this fascinating topic of record keeping. I am actually a super fan of record keeping, so the way we're going to run this is we're going to talk about the laws that require us to do record keeping. We're also going to talk a little bit about the why we have to keep our records. And then we're going to talk about what the new requirements are starting July 1st of this year. If you have any questions, please let me know. More than happy to answer any questions, but I will have some time at the end of this webinar to answer any really specific questions. There's also a chat feature that is up on the screen, and we will be monitoring that as well throughout the whole webinar. So if you have any questions, I can always stop and answer those, but please know that we will have time at the end. So let's get started. Record keeping is an OSHA law, 29 CFR. It is the 29 Code of Federal Regulation 1904 is where you're going to find all the record keeping requirements. As part of this webinar, we are going to send out everybody who's attending an email that will have a shortened version that has links of the 1904, so that way you'll have a quick reference document. Here's how the rule is organized. It talks about the purpose, the scope, forms, and record recording criteria, other requirements, reporting to the government, transitions, and then definitions. The purpose is to require that all employers record and report work-related fatalities, injuries, and illnesses in a timely manner. Recording or reporting a work-related injury, illness, or fatality does not mean the employer or employee was at fault. So lots of times we have clients who think that if they have to call OSHA, they're automatically assuming fault. That is not the case. OSHA has redone some of its reporting of fatality and severe injury rules. So, as of now, employers have to report to OSHA all work-related fatalities. So this is a phone call to OSHA, regardless of what time the fatality occurred. OSHA has a phone number that is active 24 hours, and there are inspectors who are on call 24 hours. So you have to report work-related fatalities, work-related hospitalizations of one or more employees, and that's inpatient hospitalization, all work-related amputations, and all work-related losses of an eye. So the fatalities, if you have a fatality, you must report and call OSHA within 8 hours of this fatality. If you have an employee that is inpatient hospitalized, has an amputation or loss of an eye, you must report this with OSHA within 24 hours of learning about it. So that's a caveat. Sometimes we aren't told, or the hospitals withhold some information, it's within 24 hours that the employer was notified that a hospitalization occurred, an amputation, or loss of an eye. Okay, we will talk about how to report those later on, but those are new rules as opposed to the old rules that we had to follow. So that is the reporting portion, calling OSHA when those incidents happen within those time frames. Then we have the record-keeping portion. Please note that workers' comp and OSHA are two separate beasts. So OSHA, what would be considered reportable for OSHA, may not even hit the workers' comp claim, or if a claim is denied by workers' comp, it still could be an OSHA recordable. So we're going to treat those totally different. So today we're only going to talk about OSHA injury and illness record keeping. So please do not rely 100% on your loss runs to complete your OSHA forms. Okay, so there are some exemptions in the law. There's small employer partial exemptions. There's industry partial exemptions. So those are like for our office supply stores. Those are for our shoe vendors, those types of things. And then we have the 1904 keeping records for other federal agencies. Today we're not only going to talk about Nevada's requirements, but we're going to talk about California's requirements as well. When we talk about partially exempt, those are employers that are exempt from the record-keeping requirements because of their size or their industry. So usually we talk about 10 or more employees. Please note that even if you do not have to keep logs because you're a small employer, you still have to report your fatalities, your amputations, the loss of an eye, or an inpatient hospitalization of one or more employees. So you're exempt from the actual paper copies, but you are not exempt from the reporting or making that phone call to OSHA in the event one of these things happens. We talk about the annual OSHA injury and illness survey. If OSHA, even if you're exempt, were to send you a letter in the mail, you must provide all of your documents and an annual survey if it's requested. Next slide. That's if you're exempt. Size exemption, if your company has 10 or fewer employees at all times during the last calendar year, and sometimes where employers get in a little bit of a sticky situation is for their seasonal work or for summer work or winter work where they hire more people to deal with their customers. So it has to be at all times during the year. You cannot exceed 10 employees. The size exemption is based on the number of employees in the entire company. So if you have a satellite office that only has 4 employees, we have to take into account the entire company. We also have to include all temporary employees who you supervise on a day-to-day basis. So lots of times we have employers who will get contracted help. If you are providing the supervision and directing a contracted employee's day-to-day activities, you must include them. Next slide. Industry exemption. So we talk about industry exemptions. All industries in agriculture, construction, manufacturing, utilities, and wholesale trade sectors are covered. So you have to report. In transportation, retail, and service sectors, some industries are partially exempt, and there's a whole list that we will send you of partially exempt industries to see if you fall into that category. Reporting criteria, this is what the standard looks like in some Part C, and this is by far one of the easiest OSHA standards to actually read and follow along with because it's a question and answer basis. So when you read it, it will tell you, do I have to report injuries that are only first aid? It'll say yes or no. So it's a very nice standard and the easiest to read in my opinion. Recording criteria, it covers all employers must record each fatality, injury, or illness that is work-related. This is one thing that kind of muddies the waters. The employee must be engaged in a work-related activity. And we'll go into that a little bit more in a second. It has to be a new case, and it has to meet one or more of the criteria contained in the standard, which we will go over in a moment. So there's a 5-step procedure to see if we actually have to record. Remember, reporting is calling OSHA. If we have a fatality, a loss of an eye, an amputation, or hospitalization, we then have to record it on our OSHA forms. So there's a 5-step process that we want to do in order to figure out if an injury at work is recordable. So, did the employee experience an injury or illness? It's a yes or no. If it's yes, we then look to see if it's work-related. It must be work-related, not something that the employee receives on off-work hours. Is it a new case? And does the injury or illness meet the general criteria? So if all of these are yes, then we record the injury or illness on our OSHA forms. So, did the employee experience an injury or illness? This is our first step. An injury or an illness is an abnormal condition or disorder. So, this is not a full-scale list, but it does talk about a lot of the things that we see on our record keeping. It's a cut, a fracture, a sprain, or an amputation. An illness is a chronic illness, so we can have a skin disease, a respiratory disorder, or a poisoning by chemicals. Those are what are considered illnesses. You'll see things like asbestosis, silicosis are also included in the illnesses as well. So, is the injury or illness work-related? This means that the injury or illness is presumed to result from events or exposures occurring in the work environment, unless an exception specifically applies. A case is presumed work-related if and only if an event or an exposure in the work environment is discernible cause of injury or illness. For instance, for employees driving to work, they're driving to work from their home of residence to work, they are not covered by OSHA. So that's their travel period, they are not covered. However, if you as an employer send your employee out to go do a task, buy some supplies from a store, and they are injured while driving their car to the store, then that would be a work-related illness or injury. The work environment is going to be defined as the establishment in other locations where one or more employees are present and are working as a condition of their employment. It's not only physical locations, but it's also going to be your equipment or materials used by employees during the course of work. So if they have to use large machines and drive around, or they have to go places or as part of their working assignment, then that would be considered their working environment. We also talk about when somebody already has been injured or has a pre-existing injury or illness. Lots of times this is where the waters get muddy again, because they've already had an injury or illness. We would only want to record it and track it if it's significantly aggravated when you are having them work. So, if it causes a death, a loss of consciousness, days away from work, days restricted where they can't do their job, and you have to come up with another job or a job transfer altogether. So maybe they were working in construction and they were a steel erector, and now they are limited by whatever the injury or illness is, and they can no longer do that task. We would transfer them. And then medical treatment. So please know that if they have a pre-existing injury or illness, and by our work environment and our work tasks, we make it significantly aggravated, we then have to put them on the log.
I'm just going to remind everyone to, if you can mute your phones, it sounds like there's an echo. So if you want, you can unmute towards the end, or if you have a question, and then we can answer it, but just don't want to record the echo.
All right, so Occupational Safety and Health Administration only deals with an employer-employee relationship. So, if there was ever a time that a customer or hired them to play tennis. Voluntary participation in a wellness plan, a medical fitness, or recreational activity is also exempt. So those company barbecues, somebody gets hurt, you do not have to record that. If you have the blood bank come on site and do blood draws, you don't have to record that because it was a voluntary participation. The second that we make those mandatory, they then become a work-related activity. Here's another interesting one. Eating, drinking, or preparing food or drink for personal consumption. So there have been times in my past where I would have an employee go heat up their lunch in their microwave, heat it up too much, put it in their mouth and burn their tongue, or spill coffee on themselves and get burned. That would not be a recordable because it's eating or drinking for personal consumption. Now, at a restaurant where they make the food for other people, that would be recordable. So if you're preparing your own food or drink, not recordable. And it's because it's not part of your daily activities. Also, if somebody were to do personal tasks outside of assigned working hours, so if I came into work and was working on one of my children's projects at work and I cut myself, that would not be recordable. Personal grooming or self-medication for non-work-related conditions or intentionally self-inflicting a wound is also exempt from being reported. Motor vehicle accidents in parking lot, access roads during commute. So we talked about going to and from work, from your home to work, is exempt from being recorded. If someone were to get the common cold or flu, that is also exempt. Mental illness is also an exemption unless a medical professional can confirm that you got that mental illness from a work-related incident. So mental illness in and of itself is not going to go on the books unless a doctor can prove that it happened because of your work. Travel status. An injury or illness that occurs while an employee is on a travel status is work-related if it occurred while the employee was engaged in work activities in the interest of the employer. So, when you go to a hotel room, and that is considered your home away from home. So anything that happens in the hotel room, not considered recordable. However, if you were traveling or you were, like we go out to California and we do site surveys, so that would be considered part of my work activity. A detour for a personal reason is not work-related. So if I went to California and I wanted to visit my sister, that detour would not be work-related if anything were to happen to me during that time. This is becoming more and more prevalent in today's society. It's our employees that work from home or telecommute. So injuries and illness that occur while an employee is working at home are work-related if they occur while the employee is performing work for pay or compensation and are directly related to the performance of their work. So if I got a cup of coffee and tripped over my dog going to my desk at home, that would not be work-related. But if I had to deal with heavy boxes or packing and shipping and got hurt that way, then it would be work-related. So, is injury or illness work-related? Are there any questions about work-relatedness before we move on? It has to be related to a task that you would normally have your employees do. So if it's work-related, that's the second yes that we need. The third yes, is the injury or illness a new case? So, consider an injury or illness a new case if the employee has not previously experienced this injury or illness before of the same type that affects the same types of the body. Or, if your employee has been hurt before, so say it's an elbow injury, and the doctor has said that they are 100% cured, ready to go, and have no more issues, and they re-injure it, that's going to be considered a new case. So the doctor is the defining person in this equation. So if they gave them 100% great bill of health, they're ready to go 100% back to work, and then they re-injure it, then that would be considered a new case. If there's a medical opinion, please note a lot of work-relatedness and other facets of record keeping are going to be determined by the doctor, a lot of it. So when we talk about is it a new case, that's all spearheaded by the doctor. The doctor is the one that's going to tell us if it's new or not. So if there's a medical opinion regarding resolution of the case, the employer must follow that opinion. If an exposure triggers a reoccurrence, it's a new case. And if signs or symptoms reoccur even in the absence of exposure, it's not a new case. So these are for our chronic or long-term diseases like silicosis, asbestosis, tuberculosis. So those will have reoccurring symptoms throughout the whole time you're suffering from those diseases. The next thing we have to ask is, does the injury or illness meet the general criteria or application to specific cases? What does that all mean? It means an injury or illness is going to be recordable if it results in one or more of the following. So we have a fatality. We have days away from work. Once again, the doctor is going to tell you what those days away from work are going to be. Restricted work activity. The doctor will also tell you what the employee can or can't do. Transfer to another job. That will also be in the doctor's opinions, especially if they say you can't lift more than 4 pounds, or you can't bend over, or you can't stand. That's going to key us into having a job transfer. Medical treatment beyond first aid. We're going to talk about what's considered first aid in a few minutes. Loss of consciousness. Loss of consciousness due to work-related activity. There are times when people will have a loss of consciousness, maybe due to pregnancy or an illness that's not work-related. So we only want to record it if it's a loss of consciousness due to, say, chemical exposure or something like that. Significant injury or illness as diagnosed by a doctor or a professional healthcare provider. If the doctor says that the employee needs to have days away from work, we do not start counting the days until the day after that doctor told them that they can't go to work. So an employee is injured, they go to the medical facility, and the doctor says, now you can't return to work for 5 days. We do not count the day where the injury or illness occurs. So our record keeping starts the very next day. Okay? So please do not include the day of injury or illnesses. Sorry, my computer's having a meltdown. Days counted, days away or days restricted. So you count the number of calendar days. Please note, it's calendar days that the employee was unable to work. We have to include weekends, holidays, and vacation days. So it's calendar days, not business days. This really muddies the water for this one as well, because lots of times we only want to count the work days. It's regardless if the employee was going to work on those weekends, we have to count calendar days. With that said, once we get to 180 days, we do not have to keep counting. So our cap day is 180 days. You may stop day count if the employee leaves the company for a reason unrelated to the injury or illness. So if you have an employee that quits, you do not have to keep counting those days. If a medical opinion exists, the employer must follow that medical opinion, especially with restrictions. Lots of times when we put people on restricted status, sometimes they'll tell you, no, I feel great today, I'm fine, and I can do whatever my job was before. We have to abide by that doctor's note. That's a binding agreement. So the employee themselves cannot choose to violate that doctor's note, just like the employer cannot choose to violate that doctor's note. So that's written in stone. If they do feel better, they always have an opportunity to talk to the doctor and figure out if they can be taken off restriction. But please always follow that doctor's note. Restricted work cases. We record if the case involves 1 or more days of restricted work or job transfer. So we'll look at the forms. We would check the box for restricted transfer cases and count the number of days, not to include the date of the injury or illness. And please remember, we cap it off at 180 days. So even if an employee was restricted for 280 days, all of our record keeping stops at 180 days. Restricted work activity exists if the employee is unable to work the full workday. So sometimes doctors will only put people back to work for 4 hours a day or manipulate their work schedule for whatever injury that they have. If they are unable to perform 1 or more routine job functions, that's also considered restricted work activity. So if I'm supposed to lift 50 pounds all day long and my doctor says because of my back injury I can only lift 10 pounds, then that would be considered restricted. An employee's routine job functions are those activities that they regularly perform at least once per week. So please keep that in mind. If they are unable to do a routine job function, they're going to be considered restricted. A case is not recordable as a restricted work case if the employee experienced minor musculoskeletal discomfort, a healthcare professional determines that the employee is fully able to perform all of his or her routine job functions, and the employer assigns a work restriction to that employee for the purpose of preventing a more serious. So if you step in as an employer and say, you know, you have a really bad back, let's restrict what you do, not because the doctor told you to, but you're looking out for that employer, it is not considered recordable. So if you're just helping out one of your employees, that is not going to be considered a recordable situation. Job transfer is another one we have to be concerned about. It's an injury or illness that an employee has experienced that they have to be assigned to a job other than what they regularly do. So if I have a truck driver who has a really bad back and can no longer drive trucks, and I put him in the office to help me out until he gets feeling better, that would be a job transfer. A case is recordable if the employee performs his or her routine job duties for part of the day and is assigned to another job. So like we were talking about before, sometimes doctors' opinions say that you can only work 4 hours at your regular job, and then you have to do another job the rest of the 4 hours, then that would be a job transfer. All right, so in order to figure out if we have a situation that needs to be recorded, we have to talk about medical treatment. Medical treatment is the management or care of the injury or illness by a licensed doctor, right? It does not include if you go to a doctor solely for the observation or counseling. So sometimes, for instance, if you had a head injury and they wanted to keep you for observation, that would not be medical treatment. If they need to do a diagnosis procedure, blood work, something like that, that is not considered medical treatment. And then first aid is not considered medical treatment. So first aid. If the employee receives first aid, and we will send you a handout with all this on a nice quick reference sheet for you, but first aid is using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strengths. If a doctor were to prescribe, let me back up for a second. So even if an employee goes to a doctor and a doctor tells them to use non-prescription medication and non-prescription strength, it's still considered first aid. If the doctor writes that they need to take Motrin, but at a prescription level, then it becomes more than first aid or medical treatment. So, for the most part, when a doctor writes a prescription, that automatically makes it a recordable case. So if they get pain medication, if they get topical ointment because they have a rash, and a doctor writes a prescription, that is going to be a recordable case. If they get a tetanus shot because they were exposed to, say, a rusty nail, that is considered first aid. If we clean, flush, or soak the surface of a wound, that's considered first aid, so it's not recordable. Wound coverings, such as butterfly bandages and steri strips, are considered first aid. Once we start using staples and stitches, that's beyond first aid or a recordable. Hot or cold therapy, so the doc says to ice pack and then switch it up in 4 hours with a hot pack, then that is considered first aid. Non-rigid means of support, so if we have like a triangle bandage or a sling, that's considered first aid. Once we start getting into bracing or cast, that becomes more than first aid. Temporary immobilization device used to transport accident victims. So if they put a C-collar on you and put you on a backboard at the scene of an accident, that's considered first aid at that point. Drilling a fingernail or a toenail and draining fluids from a blister, that's going to be first aid. An eye patch, first aid. Removing foreign bodies from your eyes using irrigation or cotton swabs, that's considered first aid. Removing a splinter or foreign material from an area other than the eye by irrigation, tweezers, cotton swabs, or other simple means, that's considered first aid. Please note that if you have to use tweezers to remove a foreign object from your eye, that becomes more than first aid. That's why there's that distinguishing factor right there. If the doctor were to tell you that you need a finger guard, that's first aid. If the doctor tells you that you need massages, you need to call me immediately and give me that phone number because I need one, that's going to be considered first aid. And then drinking of the fluids for the release of heat stress is going to be considered first aid as well. So if it's not on this list, it's going to be considered more than first aid. Therefore, it's going to be a recordable case on your OSHA log. Are there any questions about that?
Just another reminder, if there are phones that are still on and aren't muted, we can still hear a little bit of talking, it looks like, on a particular line. I can't distinguish which one it is, but just if you could, just mute your phone. There's a red button on most of these phones if you have it. And we'll continue.
Okay, so loss of consciousness. Please note that this is a work-related cause of a loss of consciousness. So if you're diabetic and you have low blood sugar and you pass out, that would not be considered work-related. So this has to be work-related to be a recordable. Significant diagnosed injury or illness. So if any of these can be linked as work-related, if it's diagnosed by a medical professional, this would be put on your OSHA log. So cancer, chronic irreversible disease, a punctured eardrum, fractured or cracked bone or tooth. These are going to be put on your log as recordable.
I told you about my following scheme.
Bloodborne pathogens. For those of you who have a risk of being exposed to blood in your daily activities, we have to record all related needle sticks and cuts from sharp objects that could be contaminated with another person's blood or any potentially infectious bodily material. Or if, say for instance, you're rendering first aid and you have a splash or other exposure to blood or potentially infectious material, and it results in the diagnosis of a bloodborne disease like HIV or hepatitis B or C, we have to put them on our OSHA logs. Medical removal. If an employee is medically removed under a medical surveillance program, for instance, we have some clients who deal with lead. If the lead in their bloodstream is too high, a doctor may tell them that they can no longer work there. It could also be silica dust. It could be chemical exposure. So a doctor medically removes them under a medical surveillance requirement. You must record the case. The case is recorded as either involving days away from work or days of restricted work activity. So sometimes they can work in other parts of your facility, but they can't work with whatever substance they're being medically removed for. If the case involves voluntarily removing the employee by the standards, so if you as an employer decide that you're going to remove that employee from that exposure, you don't have to record it. If a doctor decides that that employee needs to be removed, then you do have to record it. Hearing loss. You must record all work-related hearing loss cases where the employee has experienced a standard threshold shift and the hearing level is 25 decibels or more above audiometric 0. Those are for the employers that have a hearing conservation program and we do baseline audiograms. If we have a shift in that employee's ability to hear, we would have to go ahead and put that on our logs. Hearing loss, it compares the employee's current audiogram or hearing test to the original baseline, and that's how we get these numbers. We can adjust that for aging, but usually a doctor or medical professional will do that for us to see if we do have to put it on our record-keeping logs. Tuberculosis. Not that is super common with our trades, but if we did get somebody diagnosed with tuberculosis, it has to be a work-related incident. So an employee is exposed at work to someone with a known case of active tuberculosis, and then they develop a TB infection, that would be recordable. It's not recordable when you get it from someone living in the household with the person. The public health department has identified the worker as a contact of an individual, or a medical investigation shows the employee's infection was caused by exposure away from work. So if you go on a luxurious vacation and you contract TB, then that would not be recordable. It's only recordable if you're exposed at work to someone with a known case. So we see this in the medical profession mostly. All right, there are 3 forms that OSHA wants you to have at all times. We have our OSHA Form 300. This is going to be your log of work-related injuries and illnesses. This is a by-name log. What happened to the employee, their days away, restricted. Hopefully it's not a fatality, but that block is on there. So it's a name by name. Then we have our 300A, which is the work-related injuries and illness, but this is a summary. This does not have names on it. It's a roll-up of everything that happened that year. This is a form that has to be posted from February to April, and we'll go into that in a second. Then we have our OSHA Form 301. The 301 talks about an individual. So for everyone that's on your OSHA 300 log, you should have a 301. That's very specific information for that employee. Like what doctor did they see? What happened prior to the incident? What injured them? Those types of questions. So it's very specific to the employee. So for every entry that you have on the 300 log, and we'll look at those in a second, you need to have a 301 for each of those employees. Lots of times employers get concerned because they are worried about the HIPAA protection. Any work-related injury is not protected by HIPAA. So if I go in and I broke my arm, all of those x-rays, everything that they found would not be protected by HIPAA because you have to know all of that information for OSHA and then on the other side for workers' comp. However, if for whatever reason I broke my arm and they did a blood test and they found out I was diabetic, that has nothing to do with the injury, so that would be protected by HIPAA. So every medical decision, every medical diagnosis for the injury that happened at work is not protected by HIPAA. If they were to find something outside of that, then that could be protected by HIPAA if it plays no part of your workplace injury. Okay? So here's your Form 301. Within 7 days of an employee reporting an injury, their name must appear on this 300 form. It's a case number. That case number you make up, so you can do 1, 2, 3, however you want to. You then do your employee's name, job title, date of the injury, what occurred, and I know that these lines aren't very long, so you will use your 301 to provide more information. So you don't have to write a novel on these forms. Just do a quick description, and the 301 will back that up. So just quickly, what occurred, describe the injury or illness, and then you see your boxes, G, H, I, and J. You must pick one of those. So is it a death? Is it days away from work? Is it your job transfer? Or is it another recordable case? So sometimes employees get injured and they need stitches, but the doctor releases them and says you don't need to have any days away from work and you don't need a job transfer. So that would be another recordable case. Then if you look at the next column, K and L, it'll ask you the days away from work. And then the days away from job transfer. Please note, do not count the day that they incurred this injury or illness. It starts the next day, and these columns will never go over 180 days. So you might have 180 days in K, and you might have 180 days in L, but it should never be over 180 days. Okay? Then M1 through 6 gets a little bit more specific with an injury, skin disorder, respiratory situation, etc. So all of this needs to be filled out for each case. So if it's a days away from work, I expect to see that there's going to be an entry in for how many days, etc. Please note, even if you've had no injuries at all for the year, you must have this form readily available, date it 2018, and just keep it around because you will have 4 hours typically, depending on your OSHA enforcement inspector, to provide these documents. So even though you didn't have any injuries for the year, you must have this form. Usually they ask for 3 years prior. So if you did not have any injuries in 2016, make sure you have a blank form just to show that you know what the requirements are. Okay? So usually 3 years, but you should keep this documentation for 5 years. Next slide. Okay, here's your 301. This is your injury and illness incident report. This is very specific to each one of those lines. So you would put your employee's name, their birthday, their gender, what doctor they saw, did they get treated in the emergency room, were they hospitalized overnight, the case number, number 10, that's all up to you, whatever case number, but it should refer to the case number that you used in the OSHA 300, so that way I could use this to cross-verify. Talks about the time of event. It talks about what was the employee doing just before the injury occurred, what happened, what was the injury or illness. For the most part, we take verbatim whatever the doctor's report was if they did go to the clinic, or we talk to the employee if they did not go to the clinic and spell it out exactly. Usually you don't want to use pain or generic terms. You want to say left shoulder contusion as You want to make sure it's as specific as possible. Then they ask about what object directly injured the employee. So maybe they got cut with a bandsaw. You would put bandsaw. And hopefully this never happens, but if the employee died, when did the death occur? So that's for each one of your entries on your 300 log. You should have one of these. Then at the end of the year, you get to do this fantastic summary of your year. So if you notice the number of cases, that top line G through J, that should match your OSHA 300 log G through J. So all of this should match. At the bottom you have page totals. That's what you're going to use to fill out your annual summary. Okay? So that all should match. Then the number of days away or transferred should also match your OSHA 300 log. When we get down to the bottom, injuries, if you saw on the 300 where those check boxes were, that's exactly what we fill in here. All of our numbers should add up, okay? That's how we make sure we kind of audit ourselves. All right, on the other side in that big box, it talks about the establishment information. You would put your name, your establishment name, the street address, the NAICS code or the national code that we would use to describe your industry. And then we need to get our annual average number of employees. Usually, it's best to work with whoever's in charge of payroll to get that. Again, it's your average number of employees for that year, and this is all calendar years. And then we talk about total hours worked by employees last year. So that is going to be usually payroll again, or HR has all of that. Then an officer of the company has to go ahead and sign our 300s. Okay, we have a question.
Daniel has a question. Let's see here.
Oh, hold on. See, Maureen.
Oh,
Maureen. Okay, so it says, please clarify. We only count 180 days, but if they are out 200 days, do we just put the additional days in the next column, or do we just ignore those additional days? Great question. We stop at 180 days. So they could be out 280 days, but we stop at 180 days. So you don't have to put the additional days in the next column at all. So we're just going to stop completely at 180 days. All right, and then Daniel. I'm sorry, Daniel, I don't see your question. Oh, wait, here it is. Okay, so if the employee is injured and has days away from work and work restrictions, how do you fill that out? Okay, so if they have both, you would put the days away from work, not counting the days that they were injured, you would put that in the K column. Here, let's go back to the 300. Okay, so we put that in the K column, the days away from work, and then the job transfer, however many days, in that column, in the L column. Does that make sense? Okay. So you would record those separately on K and J. All right, so then the officer of the company would sign and date, and what they're saying is, to their knowledge, this information is correct. So this 300A takes a little bit of teamwork to try to get it all figured out. Okay? You have to post this summary from February 1st to April 30th where employees can see this. So usually break rooms, conference rooms, something like that, you would post it. OSHA can come in and look to see if it's posted during those times. After April 30th, you can take it off the wall, but you still have to have it available for employees to look at. Employees have the right to look at all of this information when they request it. So we want to have it available because that is one of their rights. Okay. So employers must enter each reportable case on the form within 7 calendar days of receiving information. Again, please note, this is calendar days. So if someone gets hurt on Monday, I have till Sunday to put it into my logs. If OSHA were to come and look at your logs, because that's one of the first things they ask for, they won't look and see if anyone's been injured or do employee interviews, and if it's not on those logs, that's a potential fine. Okay? Next slide. An equivalent form has the same information, is as readable and understandable, and uses the same instructions as OSHA, can replace your forms. However, let me caution you, it needs to be exactly like the OSHA form. So instead of reinventing the wheel, oftentimes we just recommend that you use the OSHA forms. Your forms can be kept on a computer as long as they can be produced when they are needed. So if OSHA were to come and talk to you and say, I need your OSHA logs within 4 hours, and the person who holds the OSHA logs is out on vacation, that 4 hours still counts. So you have to be able to present those when asked for them. Privacy protection. There are some instances where we do not have to enter the name of the employee on our OSHA Form 300 for privacy reasons. So if that were the case, we enter the words privacy case in the name column, and we keep a separate confidential list of the case numbers and employees' names somewhere else. With that said, when we need this, sometimes there are injuries to intimate body parts or reproductive systems that we don't want everybody to know about, because please remember, employees have their right to look at these forms. So we can put privacy case if someone were to get hurt in an intimate body part or reproductive system, if it's an injury or illness resulting from a sexual assault during work, a mental illness, HIV infections, hepatitis or tuberculosis, needle sticks, or the employee voluntarily requests to keep their name off for other illness cases. So this is when we would just put privacy. Just because the privacy case does not mean we don't have to keep records. We would just keep them separate in a locked up area. Next slide. All right, so you may use discretion in describing the case if the employee can be identified. So if there was a needle stick and someone came down with HIV, I might know that my friend at work had the needle stick. So we can use discretion so that way the employee cannot be identified. If you give the forms to people not authorized by the rule, you must remove the names first. So there's exceptions. If there's an auditor or consultant, you can give them the full names. Workers' compensation and other insurance, you have to give them all of the information. And public health authority or law enforcement agencies, you have to give them all the information. However, if anyone outside of these categories ask for it, you do not have to give names out. So OSHA is going to be under the public health authority, law enforcement agency right there. So they get all of the non-redacted information. Other requirements, we talk about multiple business establishment, covered employees, retention, updating, discrimination, state plans, and variances. So multiple business, you keep a separate OSHA Form 300 for each establishment that is expected to be in operation for more than a year. So for construction companies, for each of your sites that are going to be active for less than a year, you just keep one. If it's going to be more than a year, each establishment should have one. You may keep one OSHA form for all short-term establishments. Like we said, short-term means under a year. And each employee must be linked with one establishment. Sometimes we have employees who are rovers or like superintendents who are on each job. We have to assign them to one establishment. Okay? Covered employees. So who do we have to report on? It's any employees on the payroll. Employees not on payroll, but who are supervised on a day-to-day basis. So this is like your temporary employment agencies. They find employees for you and they give you the employees. If you are daily supervising them, they count for your books. Exclude self-employed people and partners. So if you're self-employed and you are it for your company or you have a partner, you do not have to do this. Temporary help agencies should not record the cases experienced by temp workers who are supervised by the using firm. Okay? Bye. Annual summary. So you have to review OSHA Form 300 for completeness and accuracy and correct any deficiencies. OSHA can fine you if all of your paperwork does not match. I've seen fines from as little as $1,000 to a large furniture store just got hit with a willful trying to hide injuries, and their total fine was $83,000. So I know it doesn't seem like a huge issue to do all this record keeping, but it could incur a fine if we're not doing this correctly. So that's why it's so important that whoever's signing this knows that it's accurate and it's corrected from any deficiencies. You have to complete the OSHA Form 300A, you certify it, and then you post it. After April 30th, put it in your binder, and we have to keep it for 5 years. There are some employers who like to keep it up on the wall. That's completely fine, but please make sure it's up on February 1st and it comes down or is at least visible to employees through April 30th. All right, so we talked about a company executive or an officer must certify it, an owner, an officer, the highest ranking company official working at the establishment, or his or her supervisor. It must be posted for 3 months, and this is to allow employees to see what kind of things are going on. Please note, this is not the by name 300 log. This is your summary, so no names are associated with this. It just tells you how many people were injured, how many people had a respiratory situation, or any of those other categories. Retain everything for 5 years. Update the OSHA 300 forms during that period. You don't need to update the OSHA 300A or OSHA Form 301. Usually the information that you put on there does not need to be updated. Employee involvement. You must inform each employee of how to report an injury or illness. Lots of employers are getting hit with this because employees don't know what to do if they're injured or have an illness. So you must set up a way for employees to report work-related injuries and illnesses promptly. So we always encourage employers to tell employees immediately after you're injured, let somebody know so we can get you medical treatment or deal with whatever is going on. You must tell each employee how to report work-related injuries and illnesses to you if you're the one that's going to be keeping the logs. So that way, 1, we take care of the employee, that's our first priority, but 2, our records are accurate. Employee involvement, again, you must provide limited access to injury and illness records to employees, former employees, and their personal and authorized representatives. So if any of you work with a union, the union might ask for that. Sometimes former employees will ask for it, especially if they got diagnosed with a chronic disease like silicosis or asbestosis. They'll want to see if anyone else has come down with that. So former employees are also allowed to have it. You need to provide the OSHA Form 300 by the end of the next business day. So when they request it, you have till the end of the next business day to provide it. You can provide a copy of the 301 to the employee, former employee, or personal representative by the end of the next business day. Only theirs if they're on the log, the 301 number that has all the personal information. Provide copies of OSHA Form 301 to authorized representatives within 7 calendar days. Provide only information about the case section of the form. All right, so OSHA has in its laws Section 11 that prohibits you from discriminating against an employee for reporting a work-related fatality, injury, or illnesses. Every state has a whistleblower act that protects employees. So if they were to report an injury and they got fired because they reported an injury, they are protected by the law. It also protects the employee who files a health and safety complaint and asks for access to the records. So if they file a health and safety complaint with OSHA enforcement and they get terminated because of that, they are protected by law, and an OSHA enforcement person will come and do the investigation for whistleblower. State plans. So most of you are from California or Nevada. Both of those states have their own state plans. but both of them have adopted the standard. So they have the same requirements for determining which injuries and illnesses are recordable, like we talked about. If it's anything above first aid, it's going to be recordable. And you guys are not more stringent. We just follow the law. All right, so reporting information to the government. So we talked about fatality reporting. You must call your local OSHA within 8 hours of a fatality. And I will have those handouts emailed to you guys so that way you have a quick reference, okay? So 8 hours after finding out about a fatality or severe injury or illness, you have to notify OSHA. For any patient that's hospitalized or has an amputation or an eye loss, employers must report the incident within 24 hours of learning about it. So please note, that's what that's talking about. OSHA surveys. OSHA can decide that they want you to report specifically for whatever reason, and they will send you a letter and a link to a website. You must report there within so many days. I believe it's 30 on the OSHA. The Bureau of Labor and Statistics can also send you a letter and ask for you to report this stuff as well. Here's what the new rule is. By July 1st of 2018, you must report your 300, both for Nevada and California, your 300A by July 1st of this year. You pull up. So I'm going to pull up the website so you guys can see. For this year, Nevada and California are going to use the federal website. So you would go to OSHA.gov, and you'll see all this information up here. And then on the left-hand side, as you're looking at it, it says Take Action. So it says Contact OSHA, File Safety and Health Complaint. This is for Fed OSHA. So if you were to report through here, federal OSHA would then report to our local agencies. If you have a fatality or a loss of an eye or amputation, call your local office. And that's different for all of you. If you're in the Reno area, you would call the Reno enforcement. California, it depends on which area you're at, but you would call your local office. However, for this year, California and Nevada, you would go to Submit 2017 Data Electronically, and this talks about how you're going to do your injury tracking application. So it talks about all the rules, who has to do it, why they have to do it, etc. For this year and this year alone, any establishment that has 250 or more employees has to report their 300A by July 1st. Okay, so that's 2017's log has to be reported by July 1st. The reason why it's so late in the year is because they were having problems with this website. So you will report that. If you have 250 or more employees in 2018, you will have to report your 300A, your 300, and your 301. 249 and below will only have to do your 300A for next year. Okay? Right now, this website will only take your 300A, so you have until July 1st to get all of your 2017 information together and launch it into this injury tracking application. Okay, so if you click on that, click on the Launch ITA, and then you create your account. Okay, when you create your account, do you guys see the OSHA website?
No.
Okay. Just kidding, we'll fix it.
1 second.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
No.
No OSHA website? Oh.
Yep.
Yay. So we're good?
So I'm just going to reiterate. We'll just go back to the page we were at.
Okay, one more.
Yep. Oh. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. So we went to OSHA.gov, message in the search bar up top, and I scrolled down and we went to submit 2017 data electronically. So I'm going to click this. Here's some announcements and information you can click on, but what we clicked on was the launch ITA.
And that's the injury tracking application. That's what ITA stands for. Perfect. Sorry again. So if this is your first time logging into this, you're going to go ahead and create your account. This is going to be the name of the person who's going to be responsible for it. So if there's any letters that get sent or anyone needs to get in contact with you, this is the person that's going to be on the line for it. So make sure you put that person's name, the company name, your job title, email addresses, phone numbers, and username. You select You're Not a Robot, and then it will go into almost exactly your 300A, and that's how you're going to put in all of your information from your 300A for 2017. So please be patient with this website. It crashes and comes up and crashes and comes up. So that's why they keep extending the deadline. So it will be July 1st of 2018. You need to get your 2017 300A put in here. With that said, we're thinking that next year California is going to have their own repository. But because they didn't have time to make their own website, California employers will put it into this injury tracking application. So it may change for next year, but for this year, this is where we're logging everything. All right, so next slide.
Can you guys see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like we talked about, if you were to have a fatality and you do not report it, that could be a potential issue with OSHA. You will call the phone number for your local office. It doesn't matter if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, if it's on a Saturday, whatever the case, you must call. What happens on a fatality that's work-related is oftentimes the police will get there, they'll secure the scene, and then OSHA takes over all of the inspections. So the sooner you call, the better. No tampering with any evidence. Just leave it as it is and have them come in. Oftentimes, other people will report it. So if there's police on scene, ambulance, fire, whoever, they oftentimes will call OSHA themselves and report that there was a fatality. That does not alleviate the employer's responsibility to call. So you will still call OSHA. Even if you have to leave a voicemail, you will call them within 8 hours. The sooner, the better. The same within 24 hours of any work-related amputation, loss of an eye, or inpatient hospitalization of 1 or more employees. The reason they give you 24 hours is because sometimes we don't know all the information within the 24 hours. So that's where that all occurs. You do not have to call and report highway or public street motor vehicle accidents outside of a construction work zone. Okay? Do not report a commercial airplane, train, subway, or bus accidents. Okay, those are not considered work-related, so you do not have to report those. Providing all of these records to representatives. You have 4 business hours to get this. So I know some of our employers maybe have a office back east. Maybe just say you're in New York and we're in California right this second, and an OSHA inspector asks you for your records. It doesn't matter that the New York office is already closed. You have to provide all this within 4 business hours. Okay? Sometimes you'll get a super cool inspector and they'll give you the business hours of where the records are located. That's not always the case because they want you to have them. So it's kind of hit or miss with that one, but I would recommend that you have it at your site at all times. For more help, you can always go to your OSHA record keeping page. We're going to send out a bunch of handouts and inundate your email boxes. I'm sorry about that in advance. There's also LP insurance. You can call us. We look at records. So please let us know. The important part is we want to have accurate record keeping because sometimes if we are going out to contract for a job, whoever we're bidding for will look at our days away and total recordable numbers and the industry average. If we're above the industry average, there have been times where contracts are lost because there's too many days away or restricted cases. So we want to make sure that we're accurately reporting everything that needs to be reported. If it's a first aid situation, please do not put it on your OSHA 300 logs. Are there any questions for me at this time? We want to schedule enough time for any particular questions. I'm done with the actual presentation, but we scheduled it for 2 hours in case anyone had any in-depth questions that they wanted to talk about. Any questions? Oh.
So Todd asks, we have to begin using the ITA online starting July 1st for 2017?
Yes. So your 2017 300A that you did last year that should have been posted February 1st through April 30th of 2018